Amy and I are happy to share with you that I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. This is a defining moment of truth for this country and for every single one of us. The challenges that we face right now, the interconnected crises in our economy, our democracy, and our climate have never been greater, and they will either consume us or they will afford us the greatest opportunity to unleash the genius of the United States of America. In other words, this moment of peril produces perhaps the greatest moment of promise for this country and for everyone inside of it.
Former Congressman Beto O'Rourke is in. Just moments ago, the Texas Democrat announced his bid for the White House with a 3-minute video and an invitation to El Paso later this month for a campaign kickoff. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Joe. It is Thursday, March 14th. Joe and Mika have the day off. I'm Willie Geist alongside Washington anchor for BBC World News America, Katty Kay, White House reporter for the Associated Press, Jonathan Lemire, former Treasury official and Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner, and senior news correspondent at WBUR Boston and an MSNBC contributor, Kimberly Atkins. We've got a lot to cover this morning, including Beto O'Rourke's presidential bid. We'll talk to the author of the Vanity Fair profile that just dropped ahead of today's announcement. Plus, Paul Manafort's legal troubles just went from bad to worse. New York now wants a crack at the convicted felon in a criminal case the president cannot pardon away. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has grounded Boeing's troubled jetliners following some 42 other countries that did it first. We'll look at what took so long and why. Also ahead, we'll talk about the college cheating scandal and the staggering 750 families who may have been involved. Plus, Matt Whitaker has left the Department of Justice, but some things he said to Congress last month just aren't going away. It all surrounds his conversations with President Trump about Michael Cohen. We'll explain that just ahead. But we do begin with former Congressman Beto O'Rourke this morning officially joining the field of 2020 Democratic presidential candidates. This weekend, he heads to Iowa, his campaign noting his 3-day trip will include visits to 8 counties that voted for President Obama in 2012 and chose Donald Trump in 2016. O'Rourke, who narrowly lost his U.S. Senate race last year to Ted Cruz, is also profiled in the new issue of Vanity Fair. He tells the magazine, quote, "I'm just born to be in it, and I want to do everything I humanly can for this country at this moment." So, Rick Tyler, this has been a long time coming. We've gone through the long road trip with Beto O'Rourke. He was in his funk. Now he's out of his funk. Now he's running for president. What do you think of his chances?
Look, there's an enormous amount of enthusiasm around Beto O'Rourke, and he does seem to electrify the progressive base of the party. You certainly hold the party. I think he could be attractive to the middle. You have to be a little bit impressed with his rollout, right? I mean, opening Morning Joe with his video. He's on the cover of Vanity Fair. He's heading to Iowa today. So if I were on the Beto team, I'd be pretty happy so far.
Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, I think that it's two different things. Beto O'Rourke, of course, has sort of been made fun of in the last few weeks with this Kerouacian road trip to find himself and find the country that he has taken. You know, obviously he was very impressive in the very close call he gave Ted Cruz in the Senate race. There was a lot of enthusiasm around him, not just in Texas, but around the country. He received a lot of donations and support from elsewhere outside of his home state. You know, there's some suggesting that did he seem a little out of touch with this road trip? You know, the Vanity Fair cover certainly is impressive, but the Annie Leibovitz photo shoot, that's not usually how you win the voters in the Quad Cities. You know, but at the same time, what he has, and it's displayed repeatedly, is he does have some sort of charisma. He has an it factor that I think a lot of Democratic candidates we've seen so far, it's not clear whether they do or not. That he possesses that sort of charisma and electricity that will excite people, and while he has taken some criticism for not really standing for much just yet, that idea of being a blank canvas that voters can fill in, that worked for Barack Obama in 2007.
Right. 3-term congressman, Katty, 8 years removed from the El Paso City Council. But you cannot take away from him that he almost upended an incumbent senator in the state of Texas as a Democrat, losing by only 2.5 points there.
Yeah, I mean, when you speak to people on the Trump camp, the candidate that they mentioned that they're nervous about is Beto O'Rourke for exactly that reason. That what he did to Ted Cruz in Texas, the run that he gave for his money in Texas, in a state that they didn't think they were going to have problems in, they put that down to Beto O'Rourke having something that voters like. And they're nervous about him. And, of course, his fundraising capacity is prodigious. I would say no woman candidate would have got away with this kind of a rollout. They would not have got away with going into the woods to find themselves. They would not have got away with ditching their spouse and children for a few days to go on a road trip. They wouldn't have got away with the Annie Leibovitz-style gushing, frankly, profile. All of that will be forgotten if he is the Democrat that manages to excite people, rally them around him, and get the money going. And Democrats are looking for a star. They're looking for somebody to emerge who's a star who excites them and inspires them. Could be him.
So Kimberly Atkins, another name on this list in the Democratic field. We're now waiting to see whether or not Joe Biden will get in. We assume he will. He's given every indication he will. Where does Beto O'Rourke fit into this big field?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now the excitement among Democrats about this growing field is absolutely true. And there are people who are waiting for Joe Biden. They see him as somebody who both knows how to talk to voters, knows how to connect with the very broad base that the Democrats have, but also brings that experience. And there are others who are looking for something fresh, fresher, newer. In that case, in terms of Beto O'Rourke, one thing that I find interesting is that Republicans are watching Beto O'Rourke more, as well as other potential Democrats, who, especially those who are charismatic, who have come out and gotten a lot of attention, and who are from red states. I mean, we heard Nancy Pelosi say that Democrats are eyeing Texas, and that is on their map now. We have other folks like Stacey Abrams who may get in, or Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who's coming from Indiana. These are red state Democrats that Republicans are already eyeing, that they see that as being the biggest threat to Donald Trump. You can see one conservative group has already started running ads against Beto O'Rourke before he even got into the race. So they're the folks who are making Republicans nervous.
Yeah, you're right, Kimberly. The Club for Growth has put up ads already against Beto O'Rourke. This is before he'd announced he was even in the race. So let's talk about money, Steve. Let's talk about Democratic donors. They've got a lot of choices. There are a lot of places they could put their money. What is the smart Democratic money going to think about Beto O'Rourke?
Well, what's interesting about this cycle, and different, evolving but different from other cycles, is the role of online money and what it's going to play in this cycle. In the past, candidates have relied on the $26, $27, $2,800 individual max checks from people in New York and places like that. But what we've seen in the last cycle, and what we see already happening now, is this upsurge of online giving. Sanders raised $6 million in 24 hours after his announcement. Kamala Harris raised something like $1.5 million after her announcement. And the key thing about Beto, which was mentioned earlier, is that he has this online fundraising capability, and that could give him the chance to be competitive in Iowa, New Hampshire, and places like that. He's a bit of, it's an unknown quality. He's kind of going down the Abraham Lincoln lane, serve a couple terms in Congress, lose a race for the Senate, and then decide you're going to run for president. It worked out okay for Lincoln. We'll have to see whether Beto can make a similar breakthrough.
I hope we don't have a similar civil
No, obviously, yes. I know.
The one thing, also, Beto is from Texas, and Texas goes on sorry, I'm confusing my primary. Never mind. We'll back.
Well, let me ask you something that Kimberly threw out there, which is the idea that Texas could be in play in a presidential election. 38 electoral votes, second only to California. Do you believe that's true, or is that still fool's gold for Democrats?
It will be true. I don't know if it'll be true in 2020. It'll definitely be true in 6 years from now.
Does Beto O'Rourke change that, though? Does he put it in play?
I think he could put it in play. And I'm thinking about the primary, because the Democratic primary is on, I think it's on March 3rd. Along with Oklahoma, along with Massachusetts. So he may, because Elizabeth Warren was expected to do well in Oklahoma, but he's from the neighboring states, so he could do Texas. So if he could do well in the first 3 states, which are all retail politics states, that's meeting voters, going to these small events, although none of the events have been very small so far, which has been quite amazing, because there's an enormous amount of enthusiasm on the Democratic side to be done.
It's worth looking at the other candidates, too, who he has an impact on, right? I think he's going to go for that centrist lane. Right. Bit of pressure there for Joe Biden. Mayor Pete, I think, probably is the one who suffers the most, obviously way down in terms of name recognition, but similar kind of style I think he has to Beto O'Rourke. So I think he knocks out because of this.
Potentially so, and he has the ability to dwarf some of the other candidates because of the fundraising, because of the name recognition. He also put enough of a scare in Texas. Let's remember, President Trump had to go campaign there and hold a huge rally for Ted Cruz in the final weeks of that election, because polls were getting close.
That's why
the White House
people are nervous
was getting nervous. Also, let's remember, just a few weeks ago, the president was in El El Paso, held a rally about to try to push for his immigration plan, the call for the border wall, for the money for the border wall, and so on. And Beto held a dueling rally and drew a similar crowd there. And clearly his presence, he's going to highlights the role that immigration, the wall, the national emergency is going to play in the 2020 race.
A couple other names to tell you about potential candidates. Congressman Eric Swalwell hinted at his potential presidential bid on Twitter yesterday as he weighs whether to jump into the crowded Democratic primary field. Swalwell replied to President Trump's Make America Great Again tweet with, "I'm working on it. Stay tuned." The California congressman recently said he would make his decision by the end of March. And Congressman Seth Moulton is headed to Iowa as he considers mounting a presidential bid. Moulton will travel to the state later this month to meet with Democratic activists and leaders. The Massachusetts congressman expected to make his decision in the next 8 weeks. So you look at this field, Steve Ratner. I mean, we're going to hit 20 pretty soon. It's the antithesis of what Democrats had in 2016, where there was effectively a coronation with one challenger in Bernie Sanders. Good thing, bad thing? What do you make of it all?
Well, first of all, you've already got people dropping out before they get in the sense of people like Sherrod Brown, who's a good guy, sort of looking around and saying this, I'm not sure there's enough oxygen in this room for me. And I think if I were Eric Swalwell, I would probably come to the same conclusion. And Seth Moulton has got a great future. He's a great guy. I know him well. But I think it's even early, even by Lincoln standards, I think it's early for him to try something like this. So I think what you're going to see is the rich and the poor. You're going to see a group of candidates who have the attraction, who have the money to be competitive, and then you're going to see some who are kind of going to die on the vine. But all in all, it's a good thing. I think it's time for the Democratic Party to come to reckoning with itself as to what it wants and let the best man or woman win.
That's the story of America today, isn't it? You're going to see the rich and the poor in this race.
Does anyone see a backlash? I'm not just talking about among conservatives or Republicans, but within the Democratic Party to all the attention Beto's gotten. And a lot of people think, well, maybe he doesn't deserve all the attention he's gotten. Maybe he doesn't deserve to be on the cover of Vanity Fair and have a glowing profile written of him. Is there a backlash to that? Can he be overrated, Rick?
Possibly. I mean, look, all the other candidates and their supporters are going to resent the attention that he gets, and he's on Vanity Fair. And I mean, that's their job. They're going to try to take him down. But I don't remember who said it last week. I think it was Jim Messina. Says he lives in San Francisco. There are more Beto signs than there are 49ers T-shirts. So he's very. And when I was in Texas during the Senate race, you just go up and down. You just see Beto signs everywhere. Now, to be fair to Cruz, they don't do road signs, but there was just a lot of enthusiasm and presence about it. And I remember I was participated in the Tribune event, and I was asked on stage whether I thought Beto would win, and I said he probably is going to lose by 3 points. And I just got booed by the entire audience.
Pretty close.
Yeah, it was pretty close. It was a 3-point race.
Being the celebrity candidate certainly has its downsides, but we've seen it work the last couple times. I mean, President Obama was Barack Obama had that rock star feeling, was painted as a celebrity candidate. John McCain tried to say he was back in 2008. And let's remember, just a couple years ago, we had an equally crowded Republican field. Donald Trump was the one who had the name recognition and the buzz, and people couldn't take their eyes off him, and he sort of just drowned out everyone around him. Now, there are certainly some other formidable Democrats in this field, which will just grow if Joe Biden does jump in as expected. But O'Rourke does come in with some of those almost institutional advantages, and people are going to be drawn to him. And if he might jump, you could see him jump out to a lead here.
And he has charisma. That's not going to go away. At the moment, the criticism of, wow, this is all a bit too much, and the self-styled Bobby Kennedy Vanity Fair cover image is coming from the press. I mean, it's coming from the political insiders. It's not coming from voters who are still to take a look at him. I think all of that fades. I mean, this is us thinking, ooh, that's a little bit too much.
The breaking news this morning. Go ahead, Kimberly.
Can I make one point, too? Remember, this time 4 years ago on the Republican side, it was all about Scott Walker and Jeb Bush. It is so early, and that is why I think you see a lot of candidates really focusing on their timing. I mean, there is some fear that if Joe Biden comes out early, that could be his height in terms of his polling numbers and kind of slip from there. That's why other folks like Seth Moulton, who I talked to yesterday, is talking about more of a May timeframe, about making his decision, letting this first wave get over with. And I think come May or June, you're going to see that second wave of people coming in, trying to capture the nation's attention once these early entrants have the shine has faded off of them a little bit.
And just one small asterisk, I think a non-trivial part of Beto's support outside of Texas anyway was because of the guy he was running against. And there were a lot of people in my world who said, if there's anybody, no disrespect, Rick, if there's anybody who want to get out of the Senate, it's Ted Cruz.
I do think
that played a role.
Donald Trump would never be able to call him low-energy Beto, right? I mean,
that is true.
He'll think of something.
Oh,
yeah.
He may even think of something this morning. We'll see. We'll come back to Beto O'Rourke. He is in officially now to the 2020 presidential campaign.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.